Remember what I'm doing. Wow, got quiet. We understand that these pillars are causing a problem. There are plenty of seats, so is everybody okay where you are? All right. Just a quick housekeeping. For those of you that registered and you're an institutional rep, if you didn't get your institutional rep ribbon, they do have them at the registration desk, so just stop by and get those. It's going to be especially important for the annual meeting for voting. We want to make sure we know that the reps are voting. Okay. And there was another important announcement that I was supposed to make, and I don't remember what it was. So there you have it. Hi, Dina. Okay. I'm Marilyn Gugliucci. I am your president. I am the AGHE president. And I want to welcome you to, I'm hearing feedback, to the 35th annual AGHE conference. So we actually started back in 1974, still going strong. As a matter of fact, they need us more now than ever. We are a hot commodity. And what I'd like to do, I know we have a small audience. A lot of people have budget cutbacks. There's a lot going on in the economy. We are going to address that at this conference in a couple different sessions. Our program chairs will be talking about that. But for the group that we have here, the real critical group that we have here, if you've been to the AGHE conference before, would you mind standing? If you've been to one before. Okay, so those of you still seating, make sure you look around and see that. Now, if you've been to an AGHE conference at least 5 or more times, please remain standing. If you've been here at least 5 or more times. Okay. So everybody's looking around. These are your veterans. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so for those of you that are not totally familiar with AGHE, and for those of you that maybe need a reminder, I remember when somebody said to me, what is it that AGHE has that no other organization has? And it was easy for me to say, AGHE is the only institutional member organization focused on geriatrics and gerontology education. The only. That's big. So the other organizations that are focused on aging tend to be individual members. So we're the only member institutional organization. That's big. And so our mission is to advance geriatrics and gerontology education. We're using the word geriatrics more. Also, not only do we advance geriatrics and gerontology education, the part that we're focused on that we want to continue to build is the support for faculty and students. We feel that we do that very well already. And what this organization is really great at, and it's not in our mission, is we're great at hugging. And I'm Italian. And what happens when you're Italian is you also like to eat off of other people's plates. Okay? So that's us. Now, what's exciting to me about this meeting, you are here, you are going to be part of history. Now, I mentioned AGHE started in 1974. At this meeting, at our annual business meeting, and I need you there, especially if you're an institutional rep, for the first time ever in 35 years, we are going to be voting in a vision statement. And that vision statement is, and hopefully we're going to vote it in, that vision statement is that AGHE is the international leaders in advancing education on aging. We are going to have a new tagline. You notice that our tagline is advancing gerontology as a field of study. Our new tagline is going to be global leaders in education on aging. That's cool. As a result of that, what has happened was that we have an international task force. Our executive board said, if we're going to be the international leaders in advancing education on aging, then our institutional task force needs to be a standing committee, which means that the chair of that committee needs to be on our executive board. That got voted in by the board. It's also part of the bylaws changes for the annual business meeting. This is cool stuff. So I need your vote. You're part of history, and I just wanted to share that with you. And I also wanted to thank the executive committee for their leadership and their progressiveness. in making that happen. So I want to thank a lot of people for making this conference happen. First of all, executive committees, current and incoming. We change our executive committee. The new members come in as of March 1st, the end of this conference. But if you're current or incoming, could you please stand so that everybody can see who you are? Do we have our executive here? Thank you very much. Much of what AGHE does is based on volunteer work, and these people have put in so much time on your behalf and on the behalf of gerontology and geriatrics, so I just can't thank you enough. I love working with these people. We have the program chairs and also is the program committee. Some people from the program committee might be here, but program chairs, Lynn, Tom, you just want to recognize you, okay. I also want to thank Michelle Saunders and the local arrangements and Barbara Giles, who have been running this whole show, to welcome you. And the program chairs, local arrangements, will be talking with you in just a bit to let you know what's happening at the conference. And then I'm not sure, I haven't seen all the AGHE staff, like Angela, James, you're here, but I really want to thank the AGHE staff. And they're not here. And if you haven't met Angela Baker, she is the new AGHE director. And so would like for you to welcome her. She's been fabulous. All the AGHE GSA staff now are working together and under James' leadership, and you'll be meeting him in just a bit. But we have some really cool things happening at AGHE right now. Some real support systems and group dynamics that I think are going to help us move that much further forward. So I want to thank everybody. Okay. With those people from the executive committee that stood up, I want to make sure you talk with them. If anything's happening at this conference that you want to see different, something that you like, great, you know, pass it along to the executive committee, to the staff. We want to hear your feedback. That's how we're going to make change. There's evaluations, but I like the personal touch. And if you want a hug too, that's great. One thing I'm going to ask you, and I ask it of the executive committee, if you present a problem or a challenge, can you also present a solution with it? Okay? So there's your challenge. If you present something that's not working, give us an idea of what can make it work. Okay. So what this leads me to is why I'm here. 10 years ago, I went up to Suzanne Kunkel, who was the president of AGHE, and I said, Suzanne, in 10 years, I want to become president of AGHE. What do I need to do? Then I was voted in as president-elect, and I checked back, and I'm like, oh my God, it's been 10 years. I mean, you know how you think something, and then all of a sudden it happens? And oh my God, it happened. So it's a message, and what she said to me was, get involved. Just get involved. And I felt like I was involved, but then I like really got involved. Well, what drove me was passion. Passion for this organization. And passion, every one of us here has passion. You have it for something, for food, for a project, for any, you know, for brownies, anything. You have passion. As soon as you share that passion with somebody else, you have community. And my experience with AGHE is that we're sharing passion about aging. And we've created this really wonderful community. So throughout this conference, for the newcomers, for the people who maybe haven't been here 5 or more years, I'm hoping that you're going to feel that passion and that you're going to share your passion with us, because that's what makes this organization work. We thrive on passion. It's certainly not budget. It's not budget, I'll tell you. It's just passion. Okay, so with that, oh, well, no, I'll tell you that later. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce James Appleby, who is the GSA Executive Director, who has been here since October 1st, so trial by fire. And Angela actually has only been with us for 7 months. So that's why we know there's going to be some glitches, because everybody's going through the annual meeting for the first time, and that's why we want your feedback. But James, if you wouldn't mind coming up.
Well, thank you, Marilyn, and welcome. Let me add my welcome to all of you. Welcome to San Antonio. Welcome to the AGHE annual meeting. It's absolutely delightful to be able to be here with you this evening, and was talking with some folks. I was reminded when you said that I joined GSA the 1st of October. I think it was Doug Reed and I were chatting earlier. He said, you know, since you joined GSA, literally, I think he put it this way, a lot has happened. And I thought, well, yeah, there's Doug. And it's so true. It's been quite a busy 5 months, not to mention the fact that our entire world has been turned upside down as a result of the changes in the economic climate, shall we say. So it has been quite a exciting period, shall we say. I'm glad to be able to get a chance to address the AGHE membership here in person. I got a chance to meet quite a number of you at the GSA annual meeting in National Harbor, just outside Washington, D.C., but I'm delighted to be able to address you as a group here this evening. And what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes and tell you a little bit about myself, just so you can get a sense of where I'm coming from, and then share with you a few of the things that we're working on back at AGHE and GSA headquarters, just to give you a sense of some of the things on our radar screen, as they say. By way of background, I've trained as a pharmacist, so I'm a healthcare professional by training. But after leaving pharmacy school, I decided that I didn't want to work in, shall we say, a more typical or contemporary practice of pharmacy. I worked in hospital pharmacy for some time and just decided it wasn't for me. So I actually went back into academia and spent several years teaching at the University of the Sciences in Philadelphia, which is actually my alma mater. And I also did a master's in public health along the way. And I wanted to share that background with you as it relates to my time in academia, just to let you know that I am quite sensitive to a lot of the challenges you all face day in and day out, whether it's the challenge of balancing your research, your service, and your education, everything you have to do as part of your annual faculty evaluation, or whether it's the challenges of having enough resources to do what it is you want to do, as well as the arm twisting that you have to do with department chairs or deans or provosts to try and get things funded, and even AGHE dues, I suspect, signed off on an annual basis. So just want to let you know that I'm sensitive to a lot of the issues I think that you all wrestle with day in and day out. In terms of what's happening in Washington, a couple of the big things that we're looking at. First is the fact that as a result of the most recent legislation passed by Congress and signed by President Obama, NIH finds itself with $10.4 billion more than it had a few weeks ago. It's too bad it took great news. The downside is it took an economic crisis, what we're looking at, for them to actually put the sort of money into NIH they should have been putting in all along. But hey, it's good. It's here and it's now, and that's very positive. And of course, we're obviously waiting, and I've heard some numbers circulate as to how much money is actually going to go to NIA, but hopefully it'll be a significant portion of that to help fund research that we're all very much interested in. And part of what we're trying to sort out is what are the opportunities there as it relates to AGHE, to GSA, to help the government invest those dollars wisely to advance research. So we're sort of monitoring that. Another big thing that we're active in, and I believe Marilyn's going to touch on this later, is looking at the workforce issues having to do with the aging of America. The IOM report from last April was a real call to action. There's now a group known as the Elder Care Workforce Alliance that GSA is currently a member of, and in fact GSA President Saunders is GSA's representative there and is on the steering committee for the Elder Care Workforce Alliance, and I believe that President Gugliucci is very interested in having AGHE also get more actively involved in that. And I personally think there's a wonderful opportunity for working through AGHE member institutions to do a lot to address this issue. And I look forward to being able to work with Marilyn to sort that out and figure out what some next steps might be. The last thing I wanted to mention in terms of things going on having to do with AGHE and GSA particularly is implementation of the merger review document that was completed last November. Just to remind you, it was about 10 years ago that AGHE and GSA officially merged, and there was a committee put together. I think several of you participated in that to look at how that merger of operations was going after 10 years and to identify next steps to make sure that it's successful. That document was received and approved by the GSA Council, and we are now taking steps to implement that. Most directly, in terms of how it affects us, is we are at the staff level integrating functions so that instead of us having duplicate financial accounting systems and duplicate information technology and duplicate marketing and duplicate meetings functions, we're making sure to integrate those so that we're much more efficient, and I think we'll get have a much more smoothly operating enterprise at the end of the day. Sort of said another way, instead of AGHE having 2 staff members at headquarters in Washington, we now have the ability, as a result of integrating at the staff level, to have all 27 members of the team in Washington working on AGHE activities. So it's really a very positive thing for AGHE, and I think it's the right thing for us. I want to be clear, though, that while we're merging what I'll call these back office operations to improve efficiencies, reduce redundancies, we are not in any way changing the AGHE identity. We are not changing the governance structure. Nothing of the sort of what I'll call the public-facing aspects of AGHE is changing. All we're doing is making sure that all the behind-the-scenes work that can be done by existing systems and existing staff are being done literally to free up more of Angela's time and more of Dominic's time to get after a lot of the programmatic activities that AGHE undertakes. So I want to make sure to clarify that for you. If anything, I think all these changes will simply strengthen AGHE and enable us to do a lot more with the scarce resources that we have. So that's what I wanted to cover. I wanted to add my thank you to the AGHE and GSA teams that are here. There are quite a number of folks here to help support the meeting. I also wanted to say congratulations to you, a salute to you, the AGHE membership and volunteers. I've been in the association world. I didn't mention that along the way I also spent 17 years with the American Pharmacists Association in various leadership positions there, and lastly as Chief Operating Officer. But I've worked with a bunch of different groups, a lot of different associations and societies, and I'm really struck by the level of commitment that I see by the AGHE membership and by the GSA membership. People are so committed to what they're doing. They're so passionate. I believe Marilyn talked about so passionate about what they're doing. And that's just not, let me just say, that's not everywhere. So you should feel really good about that. And I want to thank you for the time that you put in to making AGHE successful. With that, if there's anything, Angela, would you come in for a minute? Yes, thank you. Angela's just walked in the door. Angela Baker, who Marilyn mentioned. This is your new AGHE director. And Angela's the chief staff officer for AGHE. She's the go-to person for everything, and she's the one that provides leadership to AGHE activities day in and day out. And we're glad to have her aboard. If there's anything that the team can do to make your stay here in San Antonio more successful, please seek us out and ask us. We'll do everything we can to make sure that your days spent here deep in the heart of Texas are well worth it. Thank you.
And we're ready for the program chairs. You know what I realized for the newcomers? That I had everybody stand up, that you could see who had been here before, but now you're only going to recognize them by their butts.
You can't really follow that. almost literally. On behalf of Lynn Hodgson, program co-chair, and the members of the program committee, to welcome you to the 2009 annual meeting. And Lynn and I want to thank the members of the program committee who worked so hard to put all of these plans together. I want to thank the AGHE GSA staff for their hard work and their expertise, and to the many other people who've helped more than we really had reason to expect them to, or it was fair to ask of them. And especially want to thank Marilyn for her leadership and her great ideas and her unfailing optimism. And she's been a pleasure to work with. I have several announcements. First of all, I want to say that the symposium session sponsored by the Community College Task Force is moving from its current time at 8:30 tomorrow morning to 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. It's going to be right here in the San Antonio ballroom, and I hope everyone got a copy of the light blue handout that's announcing the change. And it's going to be a great session. Second, the K-12 student essay contest award presentation and reception is going to be held from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock on Saturday afternoon in Salon 5, and they also have a flyer going around. And if you're interested, then make sure you get one of the flyers. In general, I think the addendum is going to come in handy. There are a number of presentations that were added after the program book went to the printer, and there are a number of cancellations. So before you head off to a session, you might want to take a look at that to make sure that it's still going to be going on. Finally, in terms of a last-minute change to the program, and in particular in terms of the networking luncheon, in light of all the changed and the changing events in our economy, Marilyn and a number of other knowledgeable people in this area felt that the networking luncheon would give us a chance to incorporate both the effects and the opportunities associated with the financial situation into our discussions. So the way we're thinking of this is, or what we're going to do is that give people a chance to get their seats, introduce each other, get to the important business of eating, and then at that point, Tom Fairchild is going to speak for a few minutes on to give us an overview of the topic and to get us thinking. And he's titled his remarks "Moving Forward with the Economy in Reverse. What should we do?" After he's finished with his remarks, the tables are free to engage in discussion along whatever lines they would like. They can incorporate these ideas into their discussion or not. It's up to the people at the table. But it's a chance to discuss these things if you feel like it's something you'd like to do. One more thing about the networking luncheon. The location is in a part of the hotel that's different from where most of the other activities are going to be going on. So on Saturday, the time of the networking luncheon, you just want to head down to the lobby. There will be signs in the lobby to take you to the networking luncheon. And again, on behalf of Lynn and the program committee, have a wonderful meeting. And if you have any questions or there's anything we can do to help you during the course of the meeting, then please stop us and ask. Thanks.
I can't tell you how hard this committee worked, especially when we had staff changes, all the databases changed, it was unbelievable, and they just really hung in there. So Lynn and Tom, more thanks than I could ever share with words, really. I'd like to bring our local arrangements, Michelle Saunders and Barb Giles, to fill you in on what's happening.
As always, the most important thing is the bathrooms are out and to the right. So we always start there. That's the #1 item. Welcome to San Antonio, and we're thrilled that you're all here. I love the theme, needless to say. Where are you? There you are. Okay. We just want to give you a few brief info items, and that's not one of them, but it's a great slide. That's the convention center, actually, the Chamber of Commerce area. And there's a lot of opportunities for you to enjoy San Antonio while you're at the conference. We had every nun in San Antonio praying it wouldn't rain. So it's not going to rain for the entire conference because they promised. And in addition to that, tomorrow night, instead of Saturday night, tomorrow night will be dine around night, Friday night. When you face on the second floor the registration tables, it's a table on the left where you sign up for the dine arounds. I encourage you to do that. They are all restaurants on the RiverWalk. They're in easy walking distance. This year you will not have a host for your table. You will be your own hosts in terms of meeting, going to the restaurant. The folks downstairs on the first floor, the bellhops, particularly Joseph, as I recall, Joe, and anybody else, they can all tell you where the restaurants are, but we'll have a map and the addresses by the sign-up book anyway. And in addition to that, Saturday night is the special event night. So it's a lot like Baltimore where they had to switch the nights. We had to do the same thing where we couldn't get the venue. And Barbara Giles, who has really bulldogged so much of what's happening at this conference, is going to tell you about that. But you'll notice that AGHE has gone green this year. And while the bags are not green, they are white and red, and they are recyclable, and they're great for groceries and anything else you want to use them for. And Barbara's responsible for doing that, and she did a really good job. And she's also going to tell you about the special event, which she has single-handedly wrestled to the ground.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to say howdy, but I don't have on my mini pearl hat, so I'll just say hello. When I found out that you folks were coming to San Antonio, as a native San Antonian, I wanted you to have a flavor of what I grew up with. The Buckhorn Saloon and the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame is just that. So for your delight and entertainment, we have arranged for you to go there via Star Shuttle buses. The buses will be here about 6 o'clock, and we'll have 3 buses, and when the first one gets full, then he's going to take that bus load, and then they'll return, and they'll keep returning until everyone is there. At the Buckhorn Saloon, and let's see, the Buckhorn Saloon goes back to 1881. It was an actual saloon, although it isn't now, but it's also got wildlife exhibits from all over the world. The Texas Ranger Hall of Fame is recently been moved to be with the Buckhorn Saloon, and everybody's heard of the Texas Rangers, and this is the Hall of Fame commemorating their role in settling Texas. So after you have toured both of these facilities, then we're going to have in the Topper Wine Room upstairs a meal that's going to have some Texas barbecue and beef picadillo, some brownies and some guacamole, and then the bus will be there to pick us back up and take us back to the hotel about 8 o'clock. So I hope everyone will come. In order to get on the bus, just have your name tag on. We're not going to print tickets this year, trying to go green, but even if you don't have on your name tag and someone can say, yeah, he's with me, we're going to let you on the bus. So I hope y'all will plan on going. We look forward to a great evening.
There's one more thing that we're doing this year that's a little bit different, and part of it is in an effort to do some fundraising for AGHE. And what we're doing is we're filming, and you can see Bob Merrill back there from the Health Science Center. Hi, Bob, who's filming tonight, and he will be filming 4 of the primary plenary type presentations, and Mark Johnson will be also filming 2 additional ones. So we're going to have DVDs available for purchase. Eventually, it'll come in some sort of email or informational thing from the office once those things are finished and edited. And we also wanted to remind everyone that there is a silent auction, and it is the best silent auction we've ever had. And I know we say that every year, but it is the best silent auction we've ever had. So please do this and participate. I don't think you'll be sorry. There are some very unique Texas items in there, as well as the more traditional items that we always have.
Thank you. And Michelle and Barbara, please pass along our thanks to all your volunteers and your committee. So it's a lot of work putting on a conference. So I got two microphones going here. Our sponsors, AARP, Quinnipiac University, Radford University, Unicom, and University of Texas Health Science Center. I know for a fact, without one of those sponsors, we wouldn't be having the special event on Saturday night, thanks to Michelle and her institution. So thank you very much for doing that. And then I just want to run through I don't want to run through, I want to recognize the award recipients for this year. They will be either getting their certificates at their session if they're presenting, or during the annual business meeting. And this is the first time we've ever had the Hiram Friedsam Award. It's a mentorship award, and it's going to Suzanne Kunkel, which is just so well deserved. The 2009 David A. Peterson Award is going to Brent C. Williams, and then honorable mention to Constance L. Kugel. Would it be all right with you if we applauded after all of them were done? Thanks. The 2009 Mildred M. Seltzer Award is going to Althea Taylor-Jones and Stephen Cutler, and that is they're both retiring, but for their longtime service within AGHE. The Clark Tibbetts Award is going to be given to Larry Polivka, who will be presenting during the conference, and you really want to be sure to be at that session if you can. The Distinguished Teacher Award and Lecture Series, Laura Donofrio, and also Karen Copera-Fry. Congratulations to them. These are huge honors. The K-12 Task Force, they actually give out a book award for Best Children's Literature. This is the first year for this award as well, and so these awards go to Brock and the Saving Shock and The Golden Rule for their positive portrayal of older adults within their books. So you want to be finding those books. The 2009 Graduate Student Paper Award goes to Christina Miyawaki. And then we have our fellows. We have James Eller, just became an AGHE Fellow. If you're not familiar with fellow status, please do ask one of the executive board members or the staff about that. It's a very important honor to have. Della Ferguson, Utica College. Patricia Swagger, and Patricia is actually going to be our local arrangements chair for Reno next year. Donna Wagner, who is also our secretary for the executive committee from Towson University. Jan Wassel, who is also the Sigma Phi Omega chair from University of North Carolina, Greensboro. So why don't we congratulate all the award winners and the fellows. Nice job. And even with these economic times, we're happy to say that we have 8 new members coming into AGHE. If you're here, please introduce yourself to me at some point through the conference, and do connect with other people. Some of you I've talked with on the phone or emailed. So we have Benjamin Rose Institute, the Council of Ontario Universities, Northwest College, Westbrook State, York College, St. Mary's College, and Ferris State University. Did I say Capella University? I know Capella intimately. We've been talking a lot. The other thing that we have going on, I said you're going to be part of history, not only because of our vision statement and changing our international task force to a committee, but this is the first time we've ever named the President's Welcome and Reception. And if Derek Stepp is here, I'd like to have him stand up. Derek has worked with AGHE for 15 years, 7 years as the director, and we wanted to honor Derek. He went on to the American Physical Therapy Association. And we want to honor Derek tonight at the reception and give you a chance to to talk with him and to wish him well in his new position. Are you here, Derek? I just saw he was at the reception. He's on the RiverWalk. Okay, well, he will definitely be at the reception. So, it was kind of fun. This came out of the awards committee and the executive committee. It was fun. We had fun planning it. So now, for me, I'm going to come down here because I need to move around. I got a lot of energy. So here we're promoting healthy futures through education and training. The Institute of Medicine document, Retooling for an Aging America, that's my platform for these next 2 years. And that's why I pulled that into the topic. And I also use the words education and training because not only because of gerontology, but geriatrics. Sometimes we're thinking about geriatrics as a training piece along with the education piece. And what's happening in terms of the Institute of Medicine report is that I'm working with various organizations. And one of the new alliances that came out, I don't know if people are familiar with the Elder Care Alliance. Right now there's 25 organizations that have pulled together regarding focusing on the Institute of Medicine report. And AGHE should be coming onto that Elder Council soon. GSA is on the council, AGHE, so it's actually out of the American Geriatric Society. So AGHE will be working with a larger group. We've already made connections with the National AGHE organization, with the with the Association for Schools of Allied Health Professions, with the American Recreation Therapy Association. So I think what happens in our future is that we need to partner. We need to start embracing and be embraced by all sorts of organizations that have anything to do with geriatrics and gerontology. And it was amazing to me when I went to ASAP, the Association for Schools of Allied Health Professions, 22 health professions programs are represented there. And they don't do sessions on geriatrics or gerontology. You know, they're mainstream. We've got to get out there. We're the hot commodity in town. But nobody's going to know about us if we don't start reaching out. So if you're part of other professional organizations and you want me to make some kind of connection, the Community College Task Force is doing incredible work right now. If you get onto the AGHE website, go to the Community College Task Force, you'll see a really nice report that Cullen Hayashida did for that task force that we put on the website that outlines all the pieces for professional programs, 2-year programs, that are represented in the Institute of Medicine on how to move forward, what they want to have happen. So that's on that website already. Based on that as well, we connected with the American Association of Community Colleges. Let me know. I'm not shy. No, I'm not shy, you know. So, so let me tell you, my goal in life, you know what my goal in life is? My goal in life is to change the world. You know, everybody laughs at that. Do you know that all I need to do is have one person think differently about aging in a more positive way, and I've attained my goal? Because that person will then take that and share it with somebody else. And I'm going to present that to you in a kinesthetic way in just a bit, so hang on there with me. Now, what happens is we're talking gerontology, geriatrics, and I want to thank Donna Wagner for her help. She started going back. There are 2 definitions I'm going to share with you that were on the AGHE website that I want to put back on the AGHE website. But gerontology, scientific study of old age. That's cool. There's nothing action about this, though. It doesn't do anything for me. So then, you know, then we got into multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, the study of aging. We're looking at the disciplines. Gerontologists study and teach about individual aging, effects of aging on society, policies, programs, health, and life extension. That's cool. So Rowan Kahn put that out, 98, Ferraro, Guarderno, and Bass. So those people are embracing that. Well, actually, what was on the AGHE website in 2001, and it's not on the AGHE website now, and I want to hear from you throughout the conference if you're okay with this definition. The study of the aging process from midlife through to old age. So we have a transitional time. You know, it's not just stagnant. that we're going to study the physical, mental, social aspects of aging, so that that also embraces health, that we're going to be investigating, I like the action verbs, changes in society resulting from our aging population, and then we're going to apply this knowledge to policies and programs. And programs included in that are educational programs and training programs. So we're thinking about this in the broadest sense. Now, if people like this definition, or they find ways of tweaking it, we do have some of the citations that capture some of these words, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page when we're moving forward with gerontology education. At least if somebody says, well, how do you define gerontology? Go to the AGHE website. Let's get all our health professions institutions or other organizations out there looking to AGHE to see a definition. Now, in 2008, we have Butler saying a subspecialty of gerontology focused on clinical practice, research, education. I like that, subspecialty. Professionals working in this field focus on the health of older person, disease, comprehensive healthcare, well-being, older persons and their caregivers. Now, we don't know what the transition is, but back in 2001, AGHE had on their website that geriatrics is the study of health and disease in later life, okay? Where it's not much further back that everything was just about the study of disease for older people, right? That's all we focused on was disease state. So here we have health and disease, and then we're doing the comprehensive health care. Now we're back to the gerontology example, or the definition, where we're talking about physical, social, emotional, we're talking about the whole person. And in our medical system right now, we're fragmenting older people so much, you know, we're looking at their elbows and their knees and their heads and we're just fragmenting them. The whole healthcare system is fragmented. Why can't we start getting back to this comprehensive piece and have our organization support that? And then I love this last part, the well-being of their informal caregivers. We always forget about that. Today in our pre-conference workshop, we're talking about how everything's crisis-oriented when it's coming to older adults, and especially when they're dealing with healthcare issues. If we could start working with their caregivers and empower and educate older adults, then maybe we can move away from this crisis system a little bit. Can you tell that I'm passionate about this? I am very passionate about this. See this? Older adults does not equal geriatric population. Geriatrics is a negative term. It implies pathology in our society at this point. I'd like to think that later on that's not going to be the case, but right now it is. So, to make my point, and why can't we just say they're older adults or whatever? Why do we have to call them geriatric people? And remember, geriatric is the adjective, geriatrics is the noun. So if you have, like I just came from the Geriatric Nursing Leadership Academy, and I said to the nurses, you realize that you're calling yourself old nurses, right? Geriatric nurses. So you got to put an S on there. Geriatrics education. It's not old education, geriatric. Okay, so what I need you to do, everybody here know how to thumb wrestle? Do you know how to thumb wrestle? I have a reason for this, trust me. Everybody knows? Do you know how that works? I need somebody, Judy, come up here, Judy.
What, you want me to thumb wrestle?
Please. She hasn't done it since she was a kid. The idea is to just put your hands together like this, right? What is the object of thumb wrestling? What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to pin the other person's thumb. You're supposed to pin the other person's thumb, okay? So the object is to pin the other person's thumb. The goal of this exercise, you got big thumbs. The goal of this exercise is to thumb wrestle for 15 seconds and count how many pins you get. The goal is to get as many pins as you possibly can. There's a reason for this. It's going to make sense. All right? So you got to trust me.
Am I a specimen?
Yeah.
What am I
Okay.
supposed to do?
So grab. You're supposed to try to pin my thumb.
I already did.
Okay. So get a partner. We got to do this quick because I want to get David up here. We're ready to have David up here. Oh, and I don't care if you go 1, 2, 3, 4. I declare a thumb war. You got 15 seconds. Got to give it a try. Everybody ready? Oh, come on. Ready? Go. 15 seconds. Hey, come here. I need you. Come on up. Okay, okay. Bob, try it out. Okay, can I show you? Can I show you how this works?
Yeah, I
The
did.
goal was to get as many pins as you possibly can. You pin me, I pin you, you pin me, I pin you.
Okay.
All right? You got to let me pin you.
Oh, so we have to go back and forth?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to do it now?
Yeah.
In front of them?
No, we're going to show them how it works.
So we go back and forth?
Right.
I thought I was supposed to get you.
Yeah. But the goal was to get as much. Okay, stop. Whoa. All right. How many got one pin? How many got two? How many got three? How many got four? How many got five? How many did you get, Jennifer? Okay, then don't tell me. How many? Anybody got more than 10? Oh, they did. You got 10. You know the trick. Everybody know the trick? The goal was what? Get as many pins as you possibly can, right? So, in order to make that happen, in 15 seconds, we could probably get 20 pins apiece.
Okay, let's go.
She pins me, I pin her. She pins me, I pin her. She pins me, I pin her. She pins, right? The goal is to get as many pins as you possibly can. What does this have to do with aging? Thank you, Judy.
Teamwork.
No, what this has to do about aging?
You have to be agile in your
No. Wait. Listen. Whoa. Social construction of reality. Berger and Luckman, 1966. Two people get together, simply put. Two people get together. They decide something is so, it's so. As soon as a third person comes in, they pick it up, it's so, right? What has our society done with aging? You said it before. How do people see older people? Right? Sick, disease decline model. That's the model that we have out here. Do you think that that was just perpetuated because of research and real, like, data, stuff that really has meat to it? It was socially constructed. You know what's so scary, though, about this being socially constructed? Is that our older adults believe it. So now we've got a self-fulfilling prophecy going on. We are in the field where we've got to think outside the box. We got to try to change society. That's social construction. We've got enough people here to make that happen. Remember, one person can have passion, you got two, you have community. You both have passion on the same thing, you can really start making some change. But aging has been socially constructed. Just like thumb wrestling, if I said to you, if everybody thought thumb wrestling was about cooperation, you pin me, I pin you, pin me, and I say to you, make it competitive, you'd say, well, that's not fun. When I do this with my medical students, and I show them how it's done, they go, oh, you cheated. That's no fun. Well, they've been socialized to believe that thumb wrestling is competitive. So we've been socialized, our older adults have been socialized to believe that aging is about disease decline. That's why it's not only the content, it's the delivery. Everyone here has a responsibility to deliver the whole curriculum, the training, education on aging in new and refreshing ways that show solution and possibility. That's what my presidency is about. And I'm incredibly passionate about this. And I sure hope you come to the presidential session tomorrow because we're going to have some fun. Okay, so with that, thank you. I just needed to get that out of my system. I'm okay now. Who was what?
The squirrel. The
Oh, yeah, that's the social construction.
Yeah, I know, but
See that? The little slippers and the walker and the pearls? That's the social construction. It's beyond even people believing it. We got animals believing it. We're in trouble. We're in big trouble. We got work to do. Okay. David, thank you for your... We're actually running over. Are you okay? Everybody, you're going to love this guy. David Dunning is a professor of psychology at Cornell University, an experimental social psychologist. Dr. Dunning is a fellow of both the American Psychological Society and the American Psychological Society and the American Psychological Association. He has published over 80 scholarly journal articles, book chapters, and commentaries, and has been a visiting scholar at the University of Michigan, Yale University, the University of Mannheim, Germany, and the University of Cologne in Germany. He has also served as an associate editor editor of the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and is currently the executive officer of the Society for Personality and Social Psychology and the Foundation for Personality and Social Psychology. His work focuses primarily on accuracy with which people view themselves and their peers. In his most widely cited research, he showed that people tend to hold flattering opinions of themselves and their decisions that cannot be justified from objective evidence. Work that has been featured in numerous newspapers, the New York Times, magazines, U.S. News and World Report, radio, National Public Radio, television, the CBS Early Show. It has even been mentioned in Doonesbury cartoons. Now we know it's important. This work on the self has been supported financially by the National Institute of Mental Health and National Science Foundation and was recently reviewed in his book, Self-Insight, Roadblocks and Detours on the Path to Knowing Thyself, 2005 Psychology Press. His psychology and law research focuses on diagnosing eyewitness accuracy, striving to determine which questions should be asked of the eyewitnesses in order to determine whether identification is accurate or erroneous. His current work also includes research on the impact of wishful thinking on visual perception, as well as psychological influences on economic decision-making. Now, I first heard David speak on a cassette tape. He spoke at the American Medical Association. A colleague shared that with me. I loved it, and I thought that David would be just what we need to start thinking outside the box here and apply that to our students. So without further ado, I really want to thank David for being here, and the podium is yours. You can go ahead.
Okay, well, first off, I want to thank Marilyn and Angela for being such a fine host to me and to you during this sortie of mine into your world and to San Antonio. And I actually want to start off by dealing with two orders of business. The first is to bring up my PowerPoint presentation. That's actually number 3. But the first order of business, I should mention, is to talk. I'm going to be talking a lot about work in my lab, and I just want to acknowledge the work of at least 3 people who've done quite a bit of the actual intellectual toil and sweat that went into the work that we're going to be talking about, or I'm going to be talking about, namely Deanna Caputo, Joyce Erlinger, and Justin Kruger, who've now gone on to their own academic or defense industry careers. And the last order of business I want to deal with before I move on is to give you a profound, abject, and sincere apology. Now, the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm not a gerontologist. I don't do gerontological work. I don't work with elders. I may work with students who are going to work with elders, but I'm not a part of that specific mission. I was trying to see, is there a personal link that I can come up with to the gerontological world? The only one I could come up with was one that was actually handed to me about a couple weeks ago when I went to my mailbox, and I finally received that piece of mail from AARP with my name on it, which suggested to me that finally, maybe, yes, I should potentially consider the idea that maybe I am almost grown up. But beyond that, in terms of gerontology, there is no connection. But in terms of another possible connection, I'm an educator. I work at Cornell University. I deal with many students. I deal with many outside organizations as well. And that's a mission that we all share. And in that spirit, in talking about educating, what I want to talk about today, or what I want to focus on today, is what I consider to be the second great task in education. And this is one that's actually borne mostly by the student, whether that student be an elder or that student be a college-aged student, for example, in one of my classrooms. Now, we're all familiar with the first task of a student. The first task of a student is to learn, is to come into the know, is to gain expertise, is to gain knowledge, wisdom, judgment, maybe a little common sense. That's the first task. But what I'd like to argue today is that there is a second great task, and it's a task that we should pay lots of attention to because it's great in 2 senses. And that second great task is knowing when you are in the know, knowing when you have learned, knowing when you need to learn, knowing when your expertise has deficits, knowing when your knowledge or judgment might be in need of repair. If you think you are expert in retirement planning, you won't go seek out experts or seek out information. But if you think you are in need of expertise, you will seek it out, for example. This is a very important part of the learning process. Medical students, interns, residents, doctors, for example, have to know where their expertise ends and the need for a consult begins. Pilots have to know when, whether or not they can actually handle the weather conditions that are forecast for today. There are a lot of places where this second great task of education, knowing what you know, knowing when you do know, knowing when you don't know at all, comes into play. And that's what I want to focus on today because of the second sense in which this is a great task. It's a great task because it's a difficult task. What I want to argue today is knowing what you are an expert on, knowing what you might be a little foolhardy on, is actually an intrinsically difficult task. And people really don't succeed at it as much as they think. They hold conceptions of their knowledge. They hold conceptions of their skill that sometimes can be quite at variance from the reality of their knowledge or skill. Now, this is not a new observation. Actually, there are a number of people through the years who have made similar points, sometimes a little bit too extremely, I would say. For example, Sidney Harris, an American journalist of the 20th century, once proposed that 90% of the world's woe comes from people not knowing themselves, their abilities, their frailties, or even their real virtues. Most of us go through all the way through our lives as complete strangers to ourselves. Now that's a little bit stark, that's a little extreme, but it holds more truth than one would imagine until one begins to start to look at the data about people's impressions of themselves versus the reality of themselves. Now that's a little bit too extreme. I think I'm more close, in my point of view, to Josh Billings, who was a 19th century humorist, who once said that it's not only the most difficult thing to know oneself, but the most inconvenient. I am going to be talking today about why it is a difficult thing to know oneself, and particularly in the realm of knowledge, being wise, having knowledge, having expertise, and so forth. Why it's inconvenient, well, that might speak for itself as we go on in the talk. But what I really want to do specifically in this talk are three things. The first is, since I'm an empirical social personality psychologist, I have to stipulate with data that the perceptions people hold of their expertise tends to vary quite a bit away from the reality of themselves. The second thing I want to do is talk about why that is, what psychologically is going on, and in some sense leave you with the idea that having an accurate impression of your expertise actually turns out to be such a difficult task, it's a miracle we have any accuracy about it, hold any accuracy about ourselves at all. The third thing I then want to cover is what we can do as educators to try to align people's impressions of themselves more in line with the reality of themselves and their expertise, or at least not muck that up. Because there are certain practices that we can do as educators that actually can leave people with impressions of their skill that is not really reflected in their actual skill. But let me move to the first task. Let me move to the first task of just demonstrating with data that the impression people have of themselves tends not necessarily to be closely tethered to the reality of themselves. And most of my examples, by the way, are going to come from medical education. That's because it's in the medical sphere where students are tested, evaluated, and thought about the most. So that's where we have the most data, and actually the best data, in terms of taking a look at how skillful our participants are. One of my favorite examples of comparing people's perceptions of themselves against the reality of themselves comes from a study that was done by Gugliucci, published in 1989, where what he did with his research team is went out to Long Island teaching hospitals and went to surgical residents doing their surgical rotation and simply asked them to rate their surgical skill, as well as asked their supervisors and their peers to rate their surgical skills. and then waited till the end of the rotation, at which time the residents would take the ABSITE, the American Board of Surgeons in Training exam, basically a very well-validated assessment of actual surgical skill. And he just took a look at correlations. How much of these ratings of self or of peer or by supervisor correlate with actual performance on the ABSITE? And what he found is when he took a look at supervisor ratings, that they correlated quite a bit with actual performance on the ABSITE. The correlation was over 0.5, which in psychology land is a pretty big relationship. How about peer ratings? Peer ratings were 0.5. Once again, how good you're going to be is actually predictable by other people. What about self ratings? Here is self ratings. The red square does denote a zero correlation. Here's the good news, it's +0. But there's a signal of your skill out there, and everybody else seems to be catching it, but not necessarily you. Now, this is a little bit too extreme. How people rate themselves does usually bear a relationship with objective performance or objective achievement. That's absolutely typically what you're going to find, but the relationship is going to be typically weak. In a lot of different contexts, you get a finding like this where the relationship is more like 0. But in some sense, that's not the real phenomenon to concentrate on. The real thing that occurs, at least in American Western European culture, is that if you ask people to rate their ability, the ratings they give of themselves tend to be overinflated, overly flattering, overconfident relative to actually demonstrated skill. For example, in a study that was published about 5 years ago by Barnsley and his team, this is taking place at a teaching hospital in Sydney, Australia. His research team came up with a number of OSCEs, which is our objective structured competency exams. They're actually role plays for medical residents to go through where they can be graded on how proficient they are on various tasks. The task I'll talk about today is catheterization of a male patient, but all the data on all exercises pretty much looks like this, where the student comes in, they go through the structured exam where they role play doing the procedure. They're watched by a supervisor who has a very specified checklist of what the student should be doing, and are they doing the things, are they avoiding mistakes that they shouldn't be making. And then at the end, students are asked to rate themselves in various categories, and the hospital staff has come up with what performance levels they need to have these students qualify for these various competency categories. So for example, one category is, does this student still need supervision? And and one could compare what the observer grading the exam says about the student versus what the student thinks about himself or herself. And when you take a look at, you can do it, there we go. If you take a look at how much the instructor versus the students themselves, the residents themselves, categorize themselves as still needing supervision, it turns out that 50% in this study of the instructors say this student still needs supervision on this procedure. None of the students agree. But if you look at a higher categorization of competency, namely, I know this procedure so well I can teach it to other people, 80% of the students say yes, none of the instructors agree. Once again, compared to objective benchmarks, people tend to hold ideas about themselves that aren't matched either by expert opinion or objective reality. And I just wanted to bring in just one gerontological example. This is a study that was published 3 years ago by Crowne and her research team, in which what they did is they looked at Virginia, Hampton Road area elder drivers who had been referred for a driving evaluation. The drivers came in and they rated themselves, how good are they at driving relative to other elders, and some of the people said they were below average, some people said they were average, a few said they were, well actually many said they were a little bit above average, and even more said they were a lot more above average. And then they're put through a 30-minute driving simulation exercise which will classify whether they're fine drivers or are they unsafe drivers. That is, they're making mistakes and making them repeatedly. And if you take a look at the one person in this study who rated himself or herself as below average, they were safe. They were not judged as unsafe. Those who rated themselves as average, 10% of them were rated as, or 11% of them were rated as unsafe. Those who rated themselves a little above average relative to other elders said 50% of them were ultimately classified as unsafe after the simulation, and a lot above average, 52%, were rated as above safe. But the point here, and this is true of everybody, it's true of, well, in some domain somewhere, each and every one of us, the impression we hold of our expertise varies from the reality of our expertise. And that is what makes this second task so great and potentially deserving of the attention of educators. One cannot just assume that one's students are going to know when they are in the know and when they are not in the know. Some students will get it, but many students are not going to get it. And one can imagine what choices our students make because of the impression they have of themselves and what outcomes or consequences they may ultimately meet based on the reality of themselves. Well, what's going on? What is producing this disjunction between how people typically think about themselves in terms of their expertise and what might very well be the truth about themselves? To really give a good introduction of psychologically what might be going on, I can't really start with my own work. I have to start with the work of MacArthur Wheeler, and I assume he's an individual that not many in the audience have heard about. Simply because, well, he's not a psychologist, not a gerontologist, not a neuroscientist, not a sociologist, not an economist, he's not an academic, he's a bank robber. And MacArthur Wheeler's claim to fame is that in the mid-90s, he robbed 2 Pittsburgh area banks in broad daylight, no visible attempt of disguise, took the money. The surveillance tapes from the banks were shown at the 11 o'clock news that night. People recognized MacArthur Wheeler. He was arrested within an hour, and he was incredulous. How could you have found me? And the cop said, well, we have surveillance tapes of you. No, you don't. Yes, we do. No, you don't. So they showed MacArthur Wheeler the tapes, and he just stared blankly at the tapes and went, but I wore the juice. I wore the juice. Apparently, MacArthur Wheeler was under the impression that if you smeared your face with lemon juice, it made you fuzzy or invisible to video cameras. A flamboyant theory, but who knows which among us, which among me, holds theories that are just as flamboyant. Now, here's the reason why I bring up MacArthur Wheeler. To make it in this world, to successfully plan for retirement, to successfully get through a public presentation, to successfully construct an organization devoted to gerontological research and education, you have to have some sort of knowledge base, and you have to have some sort of theory or strategy about how you go about and do that. And let's assume that a lot of the ideas we have are correct. They lead us to happy outcomes. They are efficient. They work. They're optimal. But let's imagine, for some of us more than for other people, depending on the area in life, the ideas we have are deficient, or they're filled with glitches, or they're, to put it diplomatically, wrong-headed. Well, that's going to lead us potentially to a lot of errors that we don't necessarily know that we're making. That is, for a lot of us, we have knowledge. It just happens to be faulty knowledge. And because of faulty knowledge, it leads to 2 problems. The first is that we make a lot of mistakes. The second is we're not aware that they are mistakes, because this is what our knowledge suggests we should do. Now, this line of thought, I think, has been put a little bit more, articulated a little bit better by the legal scholar William Miller in his book, curiously entitled Humiliation, which was even more curiously published by my university, when he said, if you think about people who are working from faulty knowledge bases or theories that are not really optimal, in a word, you can call them incompetent. That one of the essential features of such incompetence is that the person so afflicted is incapable of knowing that he or she is incompetent. To have such knowledge already would be to remedy a good portion of the offense. That is, if a person is working from a faulty theory, a faulty tactic, a faulty strategy, they can't know it's wrong, or they would be stopping from doing what they're going to be doing. Now, because everybody does what they think is the most reasonable, that means, almost by logical conclusion, that people who are poor performers, acting incompetently, working from deficient knowledge bases, can't know that they're performing poorly. They think they're doing just fine. Now, I just want to put this in a little bit more of a formal language, because this is the way we actually talk about it in my lab and have for the past 10 years or so, is that we're really talking about having a deficiency in knowledge. Like not knowing the rules of logic, for example, or not knowing the rules of grammar, for example, or having odd ideas about investment, for example. Now, if you don't have accurate ideas about how logical rules work, you're going to be having difficulty in producing correct responses. You're going to have difficulty in producing sound logical arguments. And that we'll call the cognitive task. You have a deficit in your knowledge base. As a consequence, it causes one to make many mistakes. But because of that same deficit, you not only have the burden of making mistakes, you have a second burden. And that's the burden of knowing when an accurate decision or an accurate conclusion has been reached or an inaccurate conclusion has been reached. If you don't know the rules of logic, you don't know that what you're arguing has flaws in it. You don't know that another person's argument is logically superior. As a consequence, because of the same deficit, you suffer a dual curse, a double burden. You are making mistakes and not knowing that you're making mistakes. Now, what I'm about to do is rifle through a lot of data that basically shows this, and I'm going to go through this graph a little bit carefully, and then rifle through a lot of graphs that'll look exactly the same. What this suggests is that people who are performing poorly won't know that they're performing poorly because they don't have the knowledge they need to judge their judgments, to judge their conclusions, to judge their decisions. And one typical example of such a study that looks at something like this, what we'll do is we'll stand outside of a classroom at Cornell University as students are finishing their exam, and as they walk out, just simply ask them, how well did you do relative to other people? Like, give yourself a percentile score. And a percentile score is what percentage of people did you outperform on the test? Okay, did you beat 50% of the people on the test, 60, 40%? Did you beat everybody? Average here would be 50th percentile because 50% of the people outperformed you. You outperformed 50%. And then we asked permission to go and see how well they actually did on the exam. Now, I don't have the pointer. Oh, I do have the pointer. Even better. Okay. If I'm going to use this one over here, then what we can do is basically separate students into top performers versus bottom performers. That is, we take students and separate them into the bottom 25% in terms of their objective performance on the test. These are the students getting D's and F's. The second 25%, the third 25%, and then the top 25%. And this is how well they've actually done on our percentile measure. And then compare how well they actually did, that's the red line, versus how well they think they're doing. That's this yellow line in terms of what they think about their mastery of course material. The dotted green line is what they think of how well they did on this specific test. And what I want to basically mention are 3 findings. There are actually 4, but I bet the 4th will come up in questions. But here are the 3 findings. Here, average is 50th percentile. Note how everybody on average is rating themselves as above average. That's not a finding, that's what everybody finds. On average, Americans, Western Europeans will say they're above average, and you name it. Driving ability, ethics, leadership, you name it. Well, neuroticism, no. Then they're below average. But you get that. Second, there is a actually statistically significant real relationship between how people rate themselves and how well they're actually doing, but notice how shallow it is. Perceptions of self and performance do correlate with actual performance, but the relationship is rather weak. But what I want to focus in on is this bottom group. Well, I'm going to label it incompetent for now, poor performers, if you will. Their performance actually puts them in the 12th percentile. They think they're performing in the 65th percentile on average. They think they're doing just fine. They actually think they're doing just a little bit worse than top performers think they're doing. Now, this is in the classroom. What if you step outside and look at non-classroom tasks like emotional intelligence and look at how well people do on a performance on the Mesquite, which is the best validated measure we have of emotional intelligence out there, and compared against national norms. People who are in the 12th percentile think they're in the 70th, 75th percentile in their emotional intelligence. Knowledge of sexually transmitted diseases, people who really don't know as much as their peers about sexually transmitted diseases think they're average. Teams that are at a debate tournament, how many matches do they think they're winning during the preliminary rounds? The bottom group is winning about 22% of their matches. They think they're winning 60% of their matches. If we go to a gun club the day before hunting season begins in the greater Tompkins County, New York area and give people a quiz on firearm safety, people who are scoring the lowest on that think, well, this is the only time we've had people actually be the most confident when they're on the bottom. But note here, the key is that people who are performing poorly on a lot of different measures, and I'm rifling through a lot of different things, tend not to know that they're performing poorly. And I just want to go through one point. And that point is that at first blush, one might think that, well, people really know. They're really not, they're just not motivated to tell us that they're performing poorly. That is, somewhere deep down inside, or maybe, maybe behind a private mask, they do know that they're performing poorly. They just don't decide or hide from themselves the notion, the idea that they're performing poorly. We've actually tested that in a lot of different ways. The most direct way we've done that is brought students into the laboratory and given them a test of logic, and in the control condition we find no relationship between how well people are doing and how well they say they're doing. But in the second group, we make a deal. We basically say, look, if you can guess your percentile score within plus or minus 5 percentile points, we will give you $20. If you get within plus or minus 2, we will give you 100. Yes, it does get people's attention. And we had to run this study in 2 days to make sure not everybody heard about it. What impact did some heavy financial incentives have on the accuracy of people's self-impressions? The answer is none whatsoever. The notion here is that just simply that people who are poor performers honestly think they're doing fine because they have a basis for their decision. It's just a faulty basis for their decision. That is, they have a theory behind what why they've reached the decision they've reached. It just happens to be an incorrect one. The problem is that even incorrect theories can be as compelling, they can be as convincing to the decision maker as the correct theory is. And here's the problem, or here's why self-evaluation of expertise is intrinsically difficult. How do you figure out if you're in the group that has the right theory or the wrong theory? That's why it's intrinsically difficult. Now, we did go over a little bit, so I'm going to, sorry. I do want to mention one thing. And I'm sorry, it's just too funny not to put up. But really I want to make 2 points about this phenomenon. The first is that I'm really not talking about a them, I'm talking about each and every one of us. I'm sure somewhere, somehow, each of us has a pocket of incompetence that we may not be aware of. This really is something that is about it. So this cartoon refers a lot to me in a lot of different domains. The second thing is that I get a lot of questions, given a lot of the other work that I do, about isn't this just denial? Isn't this really just a motivated suppression of a truth that people really do know? And I want to mention to you that that might be true. There might be some denial going on. I'm not going to deny denial. But I do want to say that what really is going on here is this knowledge deficit. This knowledge deficit not only produces mistakes, it produces the inability to recognize one's mistakes and to recognize when other people are doing better. The reason we know this is that we have taken groups and given them the knowledge they need in order to recognize their mistakes. That is, we've made them competent. We've given them a test on logical reasoning, for example, then given them a 20-minute lecture about how to deal with these logical reasoning problems, and then ask them to go back and look at their test and tell us how well they thought they did. And people are quite willing to be negative about themselves. They're not going to deny poor performance when they recognize it. They just can't recognize it until you make them competent. But of course, this does leave you with a paradox, at least a paradox in these experiments that we've done in this way, which is we take people and make them competent, and the net effect is for them to become more cautious about what they think of their expertise. They're actually better, but they walk out feeling much more wary about whether or not they really have the skill that's needed. Now, I did want to talk about a second problem. I'm going to go through these slides, and maybe it'll probably come up during questions, so I think we can go through that, because really what I want to talk about, or what I want to finish up on, is the educational mission and what we should do given that self-evaluation of expertise. This second great task is such a hard task actually to execute successfully, to know when you know and to know when you don't know. Given that, what should we be aware of so that we don't end up with an education that fits, let's say, the rather cynical, pessimistic definition that was given of education by Ambrose Bierce in his Devil's Dictionary, when he said that education was that which discloses to the wise and disguises from the foolish their lack of understanding. What can we do to actually not do that, but actually have students learn? I'll mention one thing that we definitely should not do, because it is something that is commonly a format that people use in education. But it turns out that this actually may not be the best way to educate, because it exactly causes people's impressions of themselves to detach from the reality from themselves. And the particular practice I want to talk about is massed training. Now, what is massed training? Undergraduates would know it as cramming. That is, how do you learn something? Well, you intensely drill at it. You drill, you drill, you drill, drill, baby, drill, and you keep drilling, drilling, drilling until you learn that. For example, as was mentioned in my introduction, for some random set of reasons, I always end up in Germany for part of the summer. I don't intend to end up in Germany, but I do end up in Germany. And this has given me reason to try to learn the German language. And, you know, the easiest way, and a typical way that a person could try to learn German would be to drill, drill, drill on verb conjugation, diction, alphabet, dictionary meanings, and so forth. That's a very common form of training, and it has some good aspects to it. It has some pleasurable features. One pleasurable feature is that drilling, cramming, mass training actually does lead to rapid learning and high initial performance. If you want me to conjugate verbs correctly today, the best thing you can do is drill me in German. That's the way to do it. And it often leaves both students and instructors with high satisfactions and feeling of competence. Because, boy, at the end of the drilling session, you really, really know your stuff. But here's the problem. And it's a problem, actually, that's revealed, I think, most visibly in the domain of driver's education. Now, I don't know how many people here know about the driver's education literature, but it turns out, if you look at the driver's education literature, that formal training in driver safety tends to have two effects. One effect is it tends to have no impact on accident rates. But when it does, it tends to cause accident rates to go up, not down. And the question is, why do accident rates tend to go up after driver's education? Well, one answer is that if you decide you're going to teach students how to drive in icy conditions, you'll put them in a situation where you'll drill, 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 drill about how you drive in icy situations. Terrific. At the end of the day, they know how to drive in those situations. But here's the problem with human memory. Then it starts to decay. And that skill begins to evaporate until the winter comes, when people decide, I can go out and drive in these conditions, and they can't. Their self-image is still there. I did so well last summer in the simulation. But now in the real thing, the skill has evaporated. The problem is a problem of retention. That is, when one is drilling in such an intense way, although it promotes rapid learning, it doesn't promote retention. That is, the retention of the knowledge or the skill over time. And it also doesn't really do much to transfer to different situations. So what must you do? That is, this is a problem with mass training. Is there an alternative that actually works a little bit better? And it turns out that there is an alternative that works better. And it's to not train in such an intense burst of a period, but rather to distribute training over time. That is to come back to something again and again, spaced over time. Actually, the CDs I use to learn German do this. That is, in CD 13, all of a sudden I'm dealing with words and constructions that I was learning back in CD 9 out of the blue. And then suddenly they come back on CD 16, and then they're back on CD 33. That is, the training keeps coming back to remind me, to ping me, and to ping my brain about what the problem is and how do I address it. And I think the training CDs have actually worked. I can delightfully tell you that my German is good enough that my colleagues in Germany will be delighted when I speak. They'll compliment me on my accent and before they switch to English. So I've achieved what I want to achieve. But the issue with mass training, and this is an issue, is that it can lead to overconfidence. A divergence between what people think about themselves versus what the reality of themselves that is introduced by educational practices. Let me give you an example of this. A lot of what I'm really talking about here is a set of principles that have been studied by Bob Bjork in his laboratory at UCLA, where he's talked about the differences between massed and distributed training. For example, what he's done is experiments where people are brought into the laboratory and taught various key punch patterns that they have to learn. But they learn these key punch patterns in one of two conditions. In one condition, they learn pattern 1, drill, drill. Okay, that's over. Then they learn pattern 2, drill, drill. Pattern 3, pattern 4, pattern 5, pattern 6, all in a very blocked, intense way. In the other condition, everything is mixed up. It's all random. First you're doing a little bit of 1, then you're doing a little bit of 3, then you're doing a little bit of 4, then you're doing a little bit of 6, then you're back to 1. But at the end of the day, everybody is just as proficient in punching these key patterns, keystroke patterns that he's training them. But one group has done it in a very intense mass training way. The other group has done it in a more distributed way. Now, what I want to focus in on is not so much the fact that people end up with equal performance at the end of the day, but rather what predictions they make for how well they're going to do when they come back the next day. They will be coming back the next day, and they will be repeating this exercise. And in particular, what Bob Bjork asked them is, what do you think your error rate is going to be tomorrow? And what he finds, and it's these two dots here, is that people who have achieved, who've gone through mass training, think their error rate will be about 8%. People who've gone through distributed training think their error rate is going to be about 12%. This just isn't as fun, as pleasant, as confidence boosting as mass training. That's what people think they're going to do the next day. What happens when they actually do come back the next day? What you find is that those who went through distributed training make about 12 errors, just as they expected, but those who went through mass training make about 20% errors. That is, the decay in training has begun, though it is attached to an overconfidence that leaves people, or leaves these subjects, with an overly rosy view of how well they're going to be doing. Now, that's one thing that we should make sure that we should avoid in terms of education. I think there are other things that we can do to try to promote success at the second great task in education, which is knowing what you know, knowing where you're, knowing what you can do, and knowing where you still need work. Bob Bjork has talked about introducing a number of different difficulties in training to produce more accurate self-images, spreading training over several sessions we've just talked about, varying the circumstances of the training, reducing feedback, and also providing contextual interference. Maybe in questions I'll talk a little bit more about that. But there's another thing that I want to suggest as well in education, and the principle that I want to suggest is that I've been talking about self-evaluation, self-assessment of expertise being an intrinsically difficult task. That's true in a world in which we leave it to each and every person to figure it out left to their own devices. That is, if you're only left with your own self to try to figure out, am I doing well or doing poorly, that's a situation that can lead people to have erroneous ideas about expertise. In some sense, if people want to correct inaccurate views of their skills, what's potentially the best thing they can do is they can look to other people. One of the pet phrases that I have is that the royal road to self-insight runs through other people. People, for example, should ask for peer feedback when they're trying to make decisions. I don't know if there's been any research done on this in gerontology, but I do know in high school down to elementary school, peer assessment, though it's a little bit of a messy literature, peer assessment actually does tend to help students quite a bit to identify their deficits. What you can't identify, one of your peers will potentially be able to identify. Or at the very least, the types of grades your peers will give you tend to be closer to what the teacher will give you than what you would honestly give yourself. So peer assessment, peer feedback is essential. But even without peer feedback, I should mention that there's something else that people can do, or that educators can promote, which is an idea of benchmarking. Now, by benchmarking, I mean not necessarily trying to obtain feedback from other people, but rather just watching what they do. How do they handle the same situation? Do they do it the same way, or do they do it in a different way? It's a terrific way to give you ideas about alternative ways that you can handle difficult situations that you confront either in the classroom or real life. For example, and I'll just end on this, in a study done by Martin et al., published in 1999, what she and her colleagues were interested in was how well did students judge their interviewing skills after they went through an AGHE, an exercise where their supervisors watched them go through a standard interview of a patient who might be abusing her child. Students rated themselves and how they'd handled themselves, and their instructors rated how the student had handled the interview. And in one set of ratings that happened before anything interesting happened, what you got, especially among first-year postgraduate medical students, is not a big correlation between how they rated themselves and how their instructors rated them. Then, what the researchers did is they took the students aside and showed them the interviews of 4 other students. And these interviews were chosen to represent the range of expertise that had been shown in the interview. One student had done a particularly lousy job all the way to a student who'd done a particularly excellent job. And then students were asked to rate themselves after watching other students to see how those other students had handled the same situation. And what Martin et al. Found, particularly among first-year students, is that the correlation between self-ratings and instructor ratings more than doubled. It even improved among second-year students, which is actually pretty impressive given that they've already had a lot of experience with this particular type of exercise. Note that the royal road to self-insight may run through other people in terms of feedback or just watching. Now, I have to admit I've rushed through a little bit quickly so that hopefully we'll have a little time for questions. But the one thing I do want to mention is I do want to highlight the importance of this second great task of education, which is knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. Now, as I've mentioned before, many people through history, all the way from the Socratic Greeks all the way to popular culture figures who are not even real, have mentioned the importance of knowing yourself, and particularly the importance of knowing your deficits. What I want to argue is that this is an essential skill, and in fact, maybe I might be too cautious in labeling this the second great task in education, because there have been people, for example, namely French novelist Anatole France, who claimed that this was the first task of education, when he wrote that an education isn't how much you've committed to memory, or even how much you know, it's being able to distinguish between what you know and what you don't. That, I would like to submit, is a task that our students, we might ask them to pay more attention to, and to us, as we continue on in our craft, to try to ask ourselves as well. Let me stop there and see if we've got time for questions.
Please. Yeah, questions? Over here, Constance.
Oh, I'll let you call.
I was just going to ask if you've had data on men and women with regards to self-assessment accuracy?
Yes, we do.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yes. The question is, do we see gender differences in terms of how men and women, for example, rate their skill? And the answer is that when we take a look, we often find no difference. I mean, that's the general rule. Though I have to make 2 qualifications. The first is my subject population tends to be Cornell, and men and women, students at Cornell are not necessarily representative of men and women everywhere. If there's going to be a gender story about self-assessment of skill, it really depends on the specific setting you're talking about. So, for example, one setting we've looked at is science, and how do men and women evaluate their scientific talent. And what we find is if you just do a survey of undergraduates at Cornell, the men think they're just much more scientifically talented than the women think they are. And this matters because if you bring them into the laboratory and just give them a pop quiz on science and ask them how well they did, the women think they've done much worse on this test than the men did, even though they're doing exactly the same. That is that part of what we find is that a person's evaluation of how well they've done on a task today is really linked to these long-term views they hold about themselves. So that women who don't think they're scientifically talented, even if they're performing well, don't think that they're performing well, and vice versa for the men. They think they're doing well and not. They still think they're doing well. And by the way, this mattered because at the end of the experiment, we asked if the students would like to take part in a science Jeopardy contest we're doing with the chemistry department later on in the semester. And men were 20% more likely to say yes. And that's exactly tied into not the reality of how well they did on this test, but the perception of how well they did on this test. So that's the gender story. But it does, it does lead me to an interesting other point that I actually, if anybody has any ideas on this, that I've been thinking about when I think about gerontology, or actually about any phase in life, is that our skills change over time. Some become better, some become worse. But when we take a look at our lab and try to figure out what's the source of people's performance estimate, often their performance is related to how well they do, somewhat. But what really is related to how well they think they're doing is this preconceived notion they have about themselves. Am I good at science? Am I bad at science? Am I good at sports? Am I bad at sports? And so forth. So one question I would have is, to what extent do evaluations of performance stick because of these preconceived notions people have of themselves in the context of change, whether for the good or whether for the bad? Because what we've seen is that impressions of self are sticky, and they have a tremendous impact on how well people think they're doing on any particular task we put in front of them. So it's an interesting question.
I noticed on a couple of the charts that this, whatever the group was at the highest end, they often thought less of themselves than their actual performance. How do you explain that?
They're actually making a different error. That is, if you look at high performers and ask them objectively, like how many items on a test are you getting right, they're actually really good. And they know which items are likely to get wrong, which ones are likely to get right. They're really good. Their error is they're wrong about other people. Which means, that is, they find these tasks easy, so they just assume it's easy for everybody else. So they really don't understand how special their performance is, or their skill set is. Basically what you're seeing is something that I saw when I was a young assistant professor and taught in the summer, and I had to hire an undergraduate to be a teaching assistant in my class. And what I would do is I would hire the best teaching assistant, the best undergraduate I could find. And these are spectacular undergraduates. And the course is about 6 weeks long. About 2 weeks in, we have the first examination in the class. The student now sits down to grade it and then runs into my office and has what I began to refer to as the conversation. And here is the conversation. Burst into office. Professor Dunning, I can't believe it. These students are lousy. They don't know the material. They're making stuff up. They don't know English. Their handwriting is lousy. I can't imagine Cornell students being this bad. Can Cornell students be this bad? And my response is yes, they can be. You really are good. Now, don't get a big head. That is, the problem for top performers is they assume it's coming easy to everybody else. So objectively, they sort of know how well they're doing. But compared to everybody else, they really don't know how special they are. That's the pattern we see in the data, and that's the fourth finding I alluded to before, is what's going on with the top performers.
We'll take one more question, and then we'll go into our Derek step reception. Sally?
Can you hear me? These are all college-age students. Have any people done, you say they've been limited research among the older population. How about younger people? Kids in high school, I'm wondering if less sophisticated, less self-evaluative type folks would score differently.
It's a good question. For a self-researcher like myself, it's a very legitimate question because sort of these self-views people have themselves are a little bit more fluid during the teen years than what comes later on, even going from teen to college age. The thing I do know is that the overconfidence effect, that is people having an overinflated view of themselves, is something that you do see among the young. I mean, among the very young. I mean, it even extends to physical prowess. So 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds really think they know how to ride a bike and they don't know how to ride a bike. The original demonstration, real-world demonstration, non-college student demonstration of the overconfidence effect was asking high school students how their skills compared against everybody else's. And you would get data like 70% of the students saying I'm above average in leadership skills, but only 2% saying they're below. Everybody's saying they're at least average in their ability to get along with other people, and 25% saying they're the 99th percentile. So what you do see among the young is at least the general trend toward overconfidence. What's interesting is I think there's actually less data moving to people who are older than college-age students. So actually, if there were an area where I think it would be more, where there's a greater need for data, would be for those who are older than college students than those who are younger than college students. Oh, one last addendum, and this is indirect. There's evidence that self-esteem and narcissism are skyrocketing among younger people. By the way, compared to, let's say, 40 years ago, there's about a half standard deviation rise in scores of self-esteem and narcissism. It's a little bit controversial, but the data looks striking. So I just wanted to mention something about today's young people as well as young people in general.
Give David a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
And David's going to be out at the reception. Just a reminder, tomorrow morning, the newcomers, we have a continental breakfast, and our membership chair and other executive committee members will be there. We'd like to meet you. And please, where's Derek? Derek, we honored you before. You weren't here. We're going to go out, and everybody enjoy the reception. Thank you.
Ya no puede caminar porque no tiene, porque le falta marihuana que fumar. La cucaracha, ya no puede caminar.